So it seems lately I cannot search YouTube for anything even remotely Vedanta related without Swami Tyagananda's name coming up. And with that name comes a very painful memory. Um, I stumbled on this talk a few weeks back, and I did type in a comment which Swami Tyagananda, in his cowardice, deleted. But I cannot leave this unresponded to. I actually went to the Boston Vedanta Society, which Swami Tyagananda heads, for a little over a year around 2014 and 2015. And as a disabled person, I did not find the inclusion and love of which the Swami so eloquently speaks. After Diwali Kali Puja in 2015, I was on the front steps of the building waiting for my ADA paratransit ride. And basically, the last volunteer to leave approached me, stood over me in a very aggressive posture with his hands balled into fists, and started demanding very aggressively, "What are you doing here? Are you waiting for a ride? Did you call a cab?" I mean, he was so aggressive that I was frightened. And I told him, my ride is due in like less than 2 minutes. I'm going to be gone. And he smirked and sneered at me and said, "You're actually trespassing by being on the steps after the doors are closed." And, I was stunned. It's like, I wasn't like just some random loiterer. I was a parishioner there. And I looked at this guy and I said, I would have been gone a long time ago. Swami Tyagananda said that the puja was going to last an hour longer than it actually did. I scheduled my ride based on that. And you want me to go wait for my ride home in the rain because I got bad information? And then he just sneered and said, "People might be surprised to see you there." And he went away with his 3 bodyguards that were standing behind him in tow. The next day was Wednesday, which was study group. And I actually, instead of waiting for my ride home on the steps, I went and walked around the neighborhood and then came back and met my ride because, I didn't want to be found on the steps if I wasn't supposed to be there. The following Sunday, I did approach another volunteer who I'd been friendly with. And she basically told me that the Swami had personally ordered me to be run off of the steps. She told me nobody is to be on the steps after the doors are closed. That's the rule, no exceptions. Now, this might seem on the surface to be a perfectly reasonable rule. We don't want people loitering and blocking people who are coming out of the building. It is a very narrow stairway. But if you stop and think about it, in theory, yes, the rule applies to everyone in the community. But in actual practice, who is it going to affect? Most of the people in the community had their own cars, and most of the rest used the public transportation system. I would see them coming from the subway stop on Commonwealth Avenue. And really, people hanging out on the steps of the Vedanta Center just isn't a thing anyway. I mean, on Sunday after satsang, people want to go home and watch the ball game. And on Wednesday nights, they need to get home and get to bed because most of them have jobs and they need to get up and work in the morning. So in practical effect, the rule had no effect on the vast majority of the community. The only people who would be affected by this rule would be people who don't drive and for some reason aren't able to use the public transit system. And that would disproportionately be disabled people who relied on paratransit. To the best of my knowledge, during the period of time that I was attending at the Vedanta Society, I was actually the only person affected by this rule by virtue of the fact that I was the only one who relied on paratransit and therefore the only one in need of a nice, soft, warm concrete step to rest my butt on while I waited for my ride. So I emailed Swami Tyagananda about this incident, and he actually justified the bullying on the grounds that I had a pattern of violating this rule of not being on the steps after the doors are closed, which, from where I'm sitting, frankly, this rule seems to have been created ex post facto. I mean, even if we assume that the rule did exist and the entire Wednesday night volunteer staff had simply gone rogue and decided not to enforce it, at the very least, Swami Tyagananda knew that these volunteers had been passing me on the steps after study group every week for something like 4 months, and not one of them had seen fit to tell me about this rule until several days after this volunteer had intimidated me in the names of enforcing it. Which means that Swami Tyagananda literally justified a volunteer bullying me on the grounds that I had a pattern of sitting quietly in a place that nobody told me I wasn't allowed to be. He also suggested that if I didn't have transportation that would pick me up just exactly when study group ended, it might be easier and better if I stayed home and listened to the live stream. So basically, because I have this disadvantage, I was not even welcome to come and be with the community for study group on Wednesday night. The following Sunday, when I went to the Center for Satsang, it became very apparent from the attitude of this volunteer that I'd previously been friendly with that I was no longer welcome in the community at all. And this unwelcomeness seems to have come about as a result of reporting this incident of bullying. So Swami Tyagananda preaches love and inclusion when he is in a high-profile venue like the World Parliament of Religions. But at home, he excludes certain classes of people, namely the disabled, from being able to participate fully in the life of the community, and actively condones bullying in service of enforcing a blatantly discriminatory rule. And if anyone has the nerve to complain after having been bullied, he seems to be perfectly okay with the volunteers just running the person out of the community altogether. So Swami Tyagananda talks a good game about love and conclusion, but when the doors are closed and the cameras are turned off, I don't see him walking the walk.